Well, welcome back to another reading of the Astral World. Its scenes, dwellers, and phenomena. We are just going to get right into it with Chapter 8. We may or may not get through this in this episode. So this is Volume 4. Chapter 8, Life and Work on the Astral. What I have just said regarding the nature of the astral scenery must not be taken as indicating that the astral itself is merely imaginary or unreal in any sense, nor is the substance of which the scenery is composed any less real than the substance of which the material world is composed. On the material plane, substance manifests as matter, while on the astral plane it manifests in a finer form of stuff or material. Again, on the material plane, the material or matter is shaped by the physical forces of nature, or perhaps by the mind of man using the original material in order to build artificial structures or forms. On the astral, on the other hand, the astral material is not thrown into shape by physical forces, but is shaped and formed only by the thought and imaginative power of the minds of those inhabiting that plane. But these shapes, forms, and structures of the astral material are not to be thought of as existing merely in the mind of the astral dwellers. They have an independent existence of their own, being composed of the astral material, though shaped, formed, and built up directly by the mind power of the astral dwellers, instead of by the physical forces of nature. The astral scenery, etc., survives the passing away of the mind which builds it up, and disintegrates only after the passage of considerable time, just as do the material things on the earth plane. As for the power of the imagination of man, do not be deceived for a moment, for this is one of the most efficient powers in nature, and operates strongly even on the material plane, though on the astral its power is more easily recognized by the senses. The dwellers on the astral, their scenery, buildings, etc., are as solid as those of the material plane to the dwellers thereupon. Passing through the various subplanes and their divisions, on the astral you notice a great variety of scenery, and a great difference in the character and occupations of the inhabitants. But you notice one general characteristic underlying all of the differences, namely, the fact that all of these persons, astral dwellers, seem to be filled with an intense earnestness, and manifest a degree of concentration which gives to them an appearance of being preoccupied. This often to such an extent that they seem to be oblivious to our presence and passage through their midst, unless we address them directly. Again, everyone seems to be busy, even when their tasks are those of sport or play. The key to the occupation and pursuits of the dwellers on the astral is found in the principle that the life of the soul on the comparatively higher divisions of the astral consist in a working out of the intellectual desires and ordinary tendencies, tastes, likes, aspirations which they were unable to manifest fully in earth life. I do not mean the low sensual desires or purely animal tastes, but rather the ambitions and similar forms of desire or strong inclinations. Many of these inclinations may be very creditable, and praiseworthy rather than otherwise, but they are all concerned with physical manifestations rather than with spiritual unfoldment and evolution in the strict sense of these terms. The higher planes are those in which the spiritual forces bud and flower and bear fruit. The astral, even on its highest planes, is the scene of the living out and working out of earthly, intellectual, and similar ambitions and aspirations. The higher the plane of the astral world, the less are the old earth scenes in evidence, even in the shape of the dim background we saw as we progressed on our journey. As we mounted on the scale, these old earth scenes grew very dim, and were we standing now on the fourth subplane, they are practically out of sight. This particular subplane is not particularly elevating, but nevertheless is interesting to the student. As we pass from scene to scene, we see the happy hunting grounds of the American Indians, thickly settled with these old aborigines who have been dwelling there for quite a period of time. They are busy and happy hunting their astral buffaloes and other games, all artificially created by their imagination from the astral substance and having no real existence as living, feeling animals. A little further on, we witness similar forms of the spirit land of other primitive peoples, in some of which the disembodied warriors fight and conjure great hosts of artificial foes, and then have great feasts according to their old customs. Valhalla is here, as well as the other imaginary paradises of the old races of men, but their inhabitants are dwelling in number, being caught up in the current bearing them on to reincarnation. But note this: while there is nothing elevating in the pursuits followed in these scenes, there is nothing degrading or lowering from a strictly spiritual point of view. But there is in evidence always a living out and wearing out of the old desires of this kind to make room for higher ones. All tends towards spiritual evolution. Raising our vibrations rapidly and passing over many degrees of scenes of this kind, we find ourselves on a considerably higher plane. Here we see men engaged in what would be called useful work in earth life, but they are performing it not as labor, but rather as a joyous recreation. Observing closely, you will see that the work is all of an inventive and constructive nature. The men and women are perfecting that in which their interest was engaged while on earth life. They are improving on their work and are filled with the joy of creation. They remind one forcibly of Kipling's mention of the future when he states, quote, "No one shall work for money, and no one shall work for fame, but each for the joy of the working," unquote. On some of these subdivisions, we see the artist busily at work, turning out wonderful masterpieces. Also musicians creating great compositions of which they had vainly dreamt while in earth life. The architect builds great structures, the inventor discovers great things, and all are filled with the joy of work and the ecstasy of creative imagination. But make not the mistake, student, of regarding this as merely play, or as possibly a form of reward for well-done world work, though, of course, both of these elements play their part in the general working of the law. The main thing to remember is that in this work on the astral, there is an actual mental advance and progress. Moreover, in many cases, here on these very planes of the astral, there is being built the mold from which will actually pour great inventive and creative achievements on the material plane in the future incarnations of these souls now doing work on this plane. The astral is the great pattern shop of the world. Its patterns are reproduced in matter when the soul revisits the earth scenes. Many a work of art, musical composition, great pieces of literature, or great invention has been a repercussion of an astral pattern. This will help to explain the feeling common to all great performers of creative, imaginative, or intellectual work, the strange feeling that their work is but a completion of something at which they had previously wrought, a rediscovery, as it were. Again, in this work play of the astral, the soul is always at work, using up old ideas, aspirations, etc., and disregarding them finally. In this way, real progress is made, for after all, even earth life is seen to be largely a matter of living out and outliving, of mounting higher on the steps of each mistake and each failure. In the work of the astral, many old ideas are worked out and disregarded, many old longings exhausted and disregarded, many old ambitions manifested and then left behind on the trail. There is a certain burning up and burning out of old mental material in a place made for new and better material in the new earth life. Often in this way, on the astral, there is accomplished as much in the direction of improvement and progress as would be possibly only in quite a number of earth lives. Life on the astral is very earnest and intense. The vibrations are much higher than on the material plane. Bearing this principle in mind, these astral scenes which you are now witnessing take on a great and new meaning. You recognize them as very important schoolrooms in the great school of life. Work is being done here that cannot be accomplished elsewhere. Everything has its meaning. There is no waste effort or useless activity in the universe, no matter what the careless observer may say to the contrary. The astral is no joke of the universe. It is one of its great, real workshops and laboratories of the soul. It has its distinct place in the work of spiritual unfoldment and evolution. Chapter 9. The Higher Planes and Beyond. Raising our vibrations a little, we now enter upon the great second subplane of the astral, with its 7 subdivisions and its minor divisions and regions. Almost before I tell you, you will feel the religious atmosphere pervading this region, for this is the plane upon which the religious aspirations and emotions find full power of expression. On the subplanes are many souls who have spent some time on the other subplanes of the astral, doing their work there and then passing on to these scenes in order to manifest this part of their natures. But I wish to call your attention to the occult distinction between spirituality and religion. Spirituality is the recognition of the divine spark within the soul and the unfoldment of the same into consciousness, while religion, in the occult sense, consists of observance of certain forms of worship, rites, ceremonies, etc., the holding of certain forms of theology, and the manifestation of what many be called the religious emotions. The religious instinct is deeply implanted in the hearts of men and may be called the stepping stone toward true spirituality, but it is not spirituality itself. In its higher forms, it is a beautiful thing, but in its lower ones, it leads to narrowness and bigotry. But it is a necessary step on the path, and all must mount it in order to reach higher things. This second subplane of the astral is filled with a multitude of souls, each of whom is endeavoring to manifest and express his own particular shade of religious conception. It may be said to contain all the heavens that have ever been dreamt of in theology and taught in the churches, each filled with devotees of the various creeds. Each of these great religions has its own particular region in which its disciples gather, worship, and rejoice. In each region, the religious soul finds, quote, just what he had expected, unquote, and hoped to find on, quote, the other shore, unquote. Some remain content in their own place, while others, growing dissatisfied, drift toward the subregions or groups which comes nearer to their newly awakened conception of truth. In passing rapidly through these regions, you will find that each has its own particular environment in exact accordance with the beliefs of the person inhabiting it. Some have the appearance of a plain, old-fashioned meeting house on an immense scale, while others resembling a gigantic cathedral, filled with glorious decorations and paraphernalia, and echoing with the sound of glorious litanies and other ritualistic forms of worship. Each has its officiating priests or preachers according to its regulations. You see at a glance that the environment, scenery, buildings, decorations, etc., are built up from the astral substance by the imaginative power of the minds of those congregating at each point. All the stage setting and properties are found fully in evidence. I say this in all seriousness, and with no attempt to be frivolous or flippant. You may even see the golden crowns, harps, and stiff halos in some cases, and hear the sounds of, quote, the eternal chant of praise. I regret to be compelled to call your attention to the regions of some lower forms of religion, in which there is a background picture of a burning hell, at which the devotees gaze with satisfaction, feeling the joy of heaven intensified by the sight of the suffering souls in hell. It is a satisfaction to tell you that the suffering souls and their hell are but fictitious things created by the imagination from the astral substance, a mere stage setting, as it were. Dante's Inferno has its adequate counterparts on the astral plane. I ask you particularly to gaze upon this most horrible scene before us. A large, severely furnished edifice is shown, with seated congregation wearing a stern, hard, cruel faces. They gaze towards the top of a smoking, bottomless pit, from which rises a sort of great, endless chain, each link having a huge, sharp hook upon which is impaled a doomed soul. This soul is supposed to rise to the top of the pit once in 1,000 years, and as each appearance it is heard to cry in mournful accents, "How long? How long?" To this agonizing question a deep, stern voice is heard replying, "Forever, forever." I am glad to tell you that this congregation is dwindling, many evolving to higher conceptions, and practically no new recruits arriving from the earth plane to fill the depleted ranks. In time, this congregation will disappear entirely, and the ghastly stage scenery and properties will gradually dissolve into astral dust and fade from sight forever. All forms of religion, high and low, oriental and occidental, ancient and modern, are represented on this plane. Each has its own particular abode. It would delight the heart of a student of comparative religion to visit these scenes. There are many beautiful and inspiring scenes and regions on this plane, filled with advanced souls and beautiful characters. But alas, there are some repulsive ones also. It is marvelous in viewing these scenes to realize how many forms human religion and theology has taken in its evolution. Every form of deity has its region with its worshippers. It is interesting to visit the scenes once filled with the worshippers of the most ancient religions. Many have only a handful of worshippers remaining on this plane, while in some cases the worshippers have entirely disappeared, and the astral scenery of the region, its temples and shrines, are crumbling away and disappearing just as have the old temples disappeared on the material plane. On the highest of the subplanes of the astral, we find many regions inhabited by the philosophers, scientists, metaphysicians, and higher theologians of the race. Those who use their intellectual power in striving to solve the riddle of the universe and to peer behind the veil by the use of intellect alone. High and low are met with here. There are as many schools of philosophy and metaphysics here as there were religious sects on the plane below. Some are pitifully weak, crude, and childish in their conceptions. Others have advanced so far that they seem like demigods of intellect. But even this is not true spirituality any more than is the religious formalism and dogmas of the plane below. All has its place, however, and everything is evolving and unfolding. It is interesting to note then on this plane and the one below are to be found groups of disembodied souls who perish in declaring that, quote, there is no hereafter for the soul, unquote, and the soul perishes with the body, etc. These deluded souls believe that they are still on the material plane in spite of appearances, and they have built up quite a good counterfeit earth scenery to sustain them. They sneer and sniff at all talk of life outside of the physical body, and bang their astral tables with their astral fists to prove how solid all real things are. They believe only that which is solid and real. This, indeed, is the very irony of astral life. You have noticed certain glorious forms on these regions, student, as we have passed through these scenes, and I have promised to inform you as to their character. These were those highly evolved beings, once men like ourselves, who have voluntarily returned from higher spheres to teach and instruct along the lines of religion and philosophy, combining the best of both and leading upward towards truth these souls who have arrived at a possible understanding of these things. It is verily true on the astral as well as on the earth plane that when a pupil is ready, the master appears. The astral has many, very many of these elder brothers of the race working diligently and earnestly for the uplift of those struggling on the path. I may say here that an understanding of the nature of the various regions of the astral and the scenes thereof will throw light upon the fact that the reports of the other side given by disembodied souls at spiritualistic seances, etc., are so full of contradictions and discrepancies, no two seeming to agree. The secret is that each is telling the truth as he sees it in the astral, without realizing the nature of what they have seen or the fact that it is, at the best, merely one aspect among millions of others. Contrast the varying heavens just mentioned, and see how different the reports would be coming from some of their inhabitants. When the nature of astral phenomena is once understood, the difficulty vanishes, and each report is recognized as being an attempt to describe the astral picture upon which the disembodied entity has gazed, believing it to be actual and real. I wish here to tell you, student, some little about the planes higher than the astral. These planes transcend adequate description, enough to say here that each soul on the astral, even the very lowest, finally sinks into an astral slumber when it has completed its work on that plane. Before passing on to rebirth, however, it awakens for a time upon one of the subdivisions of the next highest plane above the astral. It may remain awake on the plane in its appropriate subdivision for merely a moment of time, or for many centuries even, depending upon its state of spiritual unfoldment. During this stay on these higher planes, the soul communes with the higher phase of itself, the divine fragment of spirit, and is strengthened and invigorated thereby. In this period of communion, much dross of the nature is burnt off and dissolved into nothingness, and the higher part of the nature is nourished and encouraged. These higher planes of being constitute the real heaven world of the soul. The more highly advanced the soul, the longer does it abide between incarnations on these planes. Just as the mind is developed and enabled to express its longings and ambitions on the astral, so is the higher portions of the soul strengthened and developed on these higher planes. The joy, happiness, and spiritual blessedness of these higher planes are beyond ordinary words. So wonderful are they that even long after the soul has been born again on earth, there will arise within it memories of its experiences upon these higher planes, and it will sigh for a return to them, as a dove sighs for its far-off home, towards which its weary wings urge its flight. Once heard, the harmony of the heaven world is never forgotten. Its memories remain to strengthen us in moments of trial and sorrow. These, then, are the real heaven worlds of the occult teachings, something far different from even the highest astral planes. The reports of the mystics are based on experiences on these planes, not upon those of the astral. Your soul has truly informed you regarding the reality of the existence of these wonderful regions and scenes. It has not deceived you. Therefore, hold fast to the ideal of the vision. Follow the gleam. Follow the gleam. Okay, so that's going to wrap up Chapter 9 of the Astral World, its scenes, dwellers, and phenomena. We are going to have Episode 5, or Volume 5, basically starting on page 77 with about 17 pages left. So that'll be another, just about a half hour probably, somewhere around there. And then I do plan on having some subsequent discussions on these topics. So I have caught a couple of things that the author mentions here that I do want to comment on personally as we continue. So really, I'm not exactly sure how many episodes in the series we're going to have. Obviously, the reading is going to be 5 volumes, so thank you for being here. Truly, I want to welcome all the new subscribers. I hope you are enjoying the reading. Thinking about that second book, but this is officially the first book on my YouTube channel that we're going to read from start to finish. We're going to leave you with one thought and one thought alone. Deep peace in the pneuma of now.